The train lurched to a stop at Linden, Kansas Station on a blistering afternoon in July 1883, and Katherine Gallagher stepped onto the platform clutching a carpetbag in one hand and a leather toolbox in the other, knowing full well she had lied on every single page of her mail-order bride application, except for the part about being unmarried and 22 years old. The advertisement had been clear enough. Rancher seeking wife for homestead outside Linden, must be capable in kitchen and household duties. Companionship and partnership valued. Katherine had read those words in the Philadelphia boarding house, where she'd spent the last 6 months after her father's printing press business had gone bankrupt, and he'd drunk himself to death shortly after. Her mother had passed when Katherine was just 8 years old, leaving her to be raised in the mechanical chaos of her father's shop, where she'd learned to repair anything with moving parts, but had never once successfully baked a loaf of bread that didn't emerge from the oven resembling a brick. The platform was nearly empty except for an older man loading crates onto a wagon and a tall figure standing near the station house. Katherine's heart hammered in her chest as she approached. The man was broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "Miss Gallagher." His voice was deeper than she'd expected from his letters, which had been surprisingly eloquent for a cattleman. "Yes, Mr. Daniels. Isaac Daniels, yes, madam." He looked her over, not rudely, but with the careful assessment of someone inspecting a horse at auction. Katherine straightened her spine. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5'8", with dark auburn hair she tried to tame into a respectable bun and green eyes that her father had always said were too sharp for her own good. "That your only luggage? I travel light. Tools are heavy enough." Isaac's eyebrows rose as he noticed the toolbox for the first time. "Tools? My father was a printer. I grew up around machinery." She decided honesty might serve her better now than later, at least in small doses. "I should tell you something before we go any further, Mr. Daniels." "Isaac, please. Isaac, I should tell you that I cannot cook worth a damn." The words hung in the dusty air between them. A muscle worked in Isaac's jaw, and Katherine braced herself for anger or disappointment or the demand that she get right back on that train heading east. Instead, his mouth quirked into something that might have been amusement. "Cannot cook at all. I can boil water without burning it, usually. Beyond that, I'm a danger to any kitchen." Katherine met his gaze squarely. "I tried to learn, truly I did, but I have no talent for it whatsoever. I can sew enough to mend clothes, but nothing fancy. I can clean adequately, but cooking," she shook her head. "I wrote in my letter that I was capable in household duties, and I suppose that was misleading." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "Anything else you lied about?" "The part where I said I was eager to embrace ranch life. Truth is, I've never been outside Philadelphia until 3 days ago, and I have no idea what ranch life entails." Katherine's fingers tightened on the handle of her carpetbag. "But I'm strong. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I keep my promises once I make them. I came here to marry you if you'll have me, and I'll do my best to be a good wife in whatever ways I can manage." The silence stretched between them. Katherine could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Finally, Isaac settled his hat back on his head and reached for her carpetbag. "Well, I suppose we'd better get you out to the ranch then. We can sort out the rest as we go." Katherine blinked. "You're not sending me back. I'm not sending you back." Isaac's expression was unreadable. "Though I'll admit this isn't quite what I expected when I placed that advertisement." They loaded her belongings into a sturdy wagon, and Isaac helped her up onto the bench seat with a gentlemanly hand that surprised her. As they rolled out of Linden toward the open prairie, Katherine took in her first real look at Kansas. The land was flatter than anything she'd ever imagined, stretching endlessly in every direction under a sky so blue and vast it made her feel dizzy. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, and dust rose from the wagon wheels in lazy clouds. "How far is your ranch?" she asked. "About 8 miles. Not too far." Isaac kept his eyes on the road ahead, where 2 horses pulled them steadily westward. "I've got about 600 acres. Run cattle mostly, some horses. Got a hired hand named Tom who helps out, and a woman from town, Mrs. Patterson, who comes twice a week to cook and do washing. I suppose she'll need to come more often now." Katherine felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I know you needed someone who could manage a household properly. Why'd you answer the advertisement if you knew you couldn't do what was asked?" It was a fair question. Katherine watched the prairie grass ripple in the hot wind. "Because I had nowhere else to go. My father died in debt. The boarding house where I was staying was going to turn me out at the end of the month. I could have tried to find work, but Philadelphia isn't kind to women alone, and the only jobs available were in factories or worse places." She glanced at Isaac's profile. "Your letters made you sound like a decent man. I thought perhaps decent was worth more than cooking skills." "My letters." Isaac shook his head slightly. "I labored over those more than I'd care to admit. Never been much for writing." "They were lovely," Katherine said honestly. "You wrote about the land and the cattle and what you were building out here. It sounded like you actually cared about something, which is more than most men can say." They rode in silence for a while. The landscape gradually shifted, with rolling hills appearing in the distance and a line of trees that indicated a creek or river. Katherine could see cattle scattered across the grassland, dark shapes against the golden prairie. "That's the southern edge of my property," Isaac said, pointing. "Creek runs through the northern section, which is where I built the house. Water's essential out here. How long have you been ranching?" "I came out here 6 years ago in 1877. Bought the land with money I'd saved working cattle drives up from Texas. Built the house myself with some help from neighbors." Isaac's hands were easy on the reins, his posture relaxed despite the heat. "It's not fancy, but it's solid. 2 bedrooms, main room with the kitchen, and a workshop I added last year." "A workshop?" Katherine's interest sharpened. "For tack repair mostly, saddles and such. I do some leather work in winter when there's less to do outside." Isaac glanced at her. "What kind of tools you got in that box?" "Wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, a small hammer. Measuring instruments, my father's best set." Katherine felt the familiar comfort of talking about something she understood. "I can fix most mechanical problems if I can see how the pieces fit together. Printing presses are complicated machines, lots of moving parts. Once you understand the principles, other machinery makes sense too." "Huh." Isaac sounded genuinely interested. "I've got a windmill that's been giving me trouble. Tom and I can't figure out what's wrong with it. Thing squeals like a pig being slaughtered and it doesn't pump like it should. I could take a look at it if you'd like." Isaac smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "I'd appreciate that, Miss Gallagher. Katherine. If we're to be married, you should call me Katherine. Katherine." He said her name carefully as if testing how it felt. "Pretty name." The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill. It was a simple structure, wood framed and painted white, with a porch across the front and a chimney at one end. Outbuildings dotted the property: a barn, a stable, what looked like a chicken coop, and the promised windmill rising against the sky. Everything looked neat and well-maintained, the mark of a man who took pride in his work. Isaac pulled the wagon up in front of the house and came around to help Katherine down. His hands on her waist were brief and respectful. But Katherine felt the strength in them and wondered what it would be like when those hands touched her as a husband's hands. She pushed the thought away quickly. The inside of the house was cooler, with windows positioned to catch the cross breeze. The main room was sparsely furnished but clean, with a table and chairs, a settee near the fireplace, and a kitchen area that made Katherine's stomach clench with anxiety. The stove looked complicated. "This would be your room," Isaac said, opening a door to reveal a small bedroom with a simple bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the prairie. "I'm in the other one," I thought. "Since we don't really know each other yet, you might want some privacy for a while." Katherine turned to look at him, surprised. "You're not expecting to consummate the marriage right away?" Isaac's ears turned red. "I'm not the kind of man who forces himself on a woman, if that's what you're worried about. We'll marry legal and proper, but beyond that, I figure we should get to know each other first, see if we suit. And if we don't suit, then I suppose we'll deal with that when we come to it." Isaac set her carpetbag on the bed. "But I'm hoping we will. I could use a partner out here, Katherine. Someone to build something with. If you can't cook but you're honest and willing to work, well, that's something." Katherine felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you for being understanding. Why don't you get settled? I'll show you around the place proper after you've had a chance to rest from the journey." Isaac moved toward the door, then paused. "Katherine, I'm glad you came, even if you can't cook." After he left, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The room was plain but not unwelcoming, and through the window, she could see the vast expanse of prairie stretching endlessly. This was her life now, for better or worse. She'd come west looking for survival, and found a man who seemed willing to give her a chance despite her failings. That was more than she dared hope for. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the small closet and arranging her personal items on the dresser. The leather toolbox she set carefully on the floor beside the bed, running her fingers over the worn surface. Her father had been a difficult man, especially in his final years when the drink took hold, but he'd taught her something valuable. The ability to understand how things worked, to see the logic in gears and levers and mechanisms. It was the one gift he'd given her that couldn't be taken away. A knock on the door made her turn. Isaac stood there holding a tin cup. "Brought you some water. Figured you'd be thirsty." Katherine took the cup gratefully and drank. The water was cool and sweet, better than anything from the city pumps. "This is wonderful, creek water, best in the county." Isaac leaned against the doorframe. "I should tell you we're going into town tomorrow to see the minister. I've already arranged for him to marry us if you're still willing." "I'm willing." Katherine met his eyes. "I made a promise. I intend to keep it." "Good." Isaac nodded. "I'll introduce you to Tom at supper. He lives in the bunkhouse over by the barn. And fair warning, I'm cooking tonight, which means it'll be beans and bacon and not much else. But Mrs. Patterson will be here day after tomorrow, and she's a fine cook." Katherine felt a pang of inadequacy but forced a smile. Beans and bacon sounds fine. That evening, she met Tom, a weathered man in his 50s with a limp from an old riding accident and a kind face. He welcomed her with genuine warmth, seeming not at all surprised that Isaac had sent for a bride. "About time," Tom said, spooning beans onto his plate. "Man gets lonely out here with nothing but cattle and an old cowhand for company." Isaac's ears reddened again, and Katherine found herself warming to both men. The conversation over dinner was easy, with Tom telling stories about various mishaps on the ranch and Isaac adding dry commentary that made Katherine laugh. The food was indeed simple, but it was edible, which was more than Katherine could have managed. After supper, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Isaac showed Katherine around the property properly. The barn was sturdy and well organized, with several horses in the stalls. The cattle were bedded down in the pastures for the night. And there, near the creek, stood the troublesome windmill. See how it's not turning right? Isaac pointed up at the blades. Should be smooth, but it catches and jerks. And that sound there, hear it? Katherine did hear it, a metallic squealing that set her teeth on edge. She walked around the base of the windmill, studying its construction. I'd need to climb up there to see the mechanism properly. Is there a ladder in the barn? But it's getting dark, Katherine. Maybe wait until morning. Morning then, she agreed. But her mind was already working on the problem, thinking through what could cause that particular kind of noise and irregular movement. They walked back toward the house as twilight settled over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took Katherine's breath away. She'd never seen a sunset like this, unobstructed by buildings and smoke. The sheer beauty of it made her throat tight. It's something, isn't it? Isaac said quietly, watching her face. First time I saw a prairie sunset, I knew I was home. I've never seen anything like it. They stood together in the gathering darkness, and Katherine felt the strangeness of her situation wash over her. Tomorrow she would marry this man she'd just met. She would become his wife, take his name, bind her life to his. It was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. I should let you get some rest, Isaac said finally. It's been a long day and tomorrow will be busy. Isaac, Katherine turned to face him. Thank you for not being angry about the cooking, for giving me a chance. We all have things we're good at and things we're not, Isaac said simply. Maybe the things you can do will turn out to be more useful than pie baking. Guess we'll find out. That night, Katherine lay in her narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie, the wind in the grass and the distant lowing of cattle and the creaks of the house settling. She thought about Isaac in the other room, probably lying awake too, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. She thought about the windmill and the machines in the barn and all the ways she might be able to make herself useful here. And she thought about the way Isaac had looked at her in the sunset light, like maybe he saw something worth more than cooking skills after all. Morning came early on a ranch, Katherine discovered. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and found the house already empty, Isaac and Tom presumably out doing morning chores. She dressed quickly in her sturdy traveling dress and ventured out to find them. The morning air was cool and fresh, the heat of yesterday not yet risen. Katherine found Isaac in the barn, forking hay to the horses. His shirt was already damp with sweat despite the early hour, and there was something appealing about the easy competence with which he moved. "Morning," he said, spotting her. "There's coffee on the stove in the house." "Should still be hot. I can help," Katherine offered. "You ever worked with horses?" "No, but I can learn." Isaac studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, come here and I'll show you how to measure the feed." He taught her patiently, explaining which horses got what amounts and how to read their behavior to make sure they were healthy. Katherine absorbed the information eagerly, grateful to be doing something useful. When a horse's water bucket needed refilling, she hauled the heavy pails from the pump without complaint, ignoring the way the handles bit into her palms. "You're stronger than you look," Tom observed, appearing in the barn doorway. "Had to be, working in the print shop. Those presses don't move themselves." After the barn chores were finished, Katherine reminded Isaac about the windmill. He fetched the ladder and steadied it while she climbed, her toolbox slung over her shoulder. The height made her dizzy for a moment, but she focused on the machinery in front of her, and the vertigo passed. The problem revealed itself quickly. One of the gears in the turning mechanism had a stripped tooth, causing it to catch and slip. The squealing came from metal grinding against metal where the lubrication had worn away. Katherine called down her diagnosis to Isaac, who looked impressed. "Can you fix it? I'll need to take this gear down to the workshop. Do you have any metalworking tools? I might be able to file it smooth enough to work properly, at least temporarily. Properly, you'd want to replace the whole gear, but I could probably make it functional. Workshop's got everything you'll need. Tom, help her get that gear off." For the next hour, Katherine worked with intense concentration, filing the damaged gear tooth carefully and cleaning the entire mechanism. Her hands grew black with grease, and sweat trickled down her spine in the growing heat, but she didn't stop until she was satisfied. When she reassembled everything and Isaac engaged the windmill, it turned smoothly and silently, water flowing steadily from the pump. Tom let out a whoop of approval. "Well, I'll be damned. She fixed it." Isaac was grinning, a full genuine smile that made him look younger and far more handsome. "That's been driving me crazy for 2 months. Katherine, that's impressive work." Katherine climbed down the ladder, wiping her greasy hands on a rag. "It's just basic mechanical repair. Nothing complicated. Maybe not to you, but Tom and I couldn't figure it out." Isaac looked at the smoothly turning windmill with satisfaction. "That's worth more than any fancy meal, I'll tell you that." The words hit Katherine unexpectedly, warming something deep in her chest. Worth more than cooking. She'd spent so much of her life feeling inadequate because she couldn't do what other women could do naturally. But here was a man looking at her with genuine appreciation because she could do something useful, something valuable. "We should get cleaned up and head into town," Isaac said. "Minister's expecting us at noon." The ride into Linden was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. Katherine wore her best dress, a deep green that brought out her eyes, and she'd managed to tame her hair into a respectable style. Isaac had dressed in his Sunday clothes, looking uncomfortable in the starched collar, but undeniably handsome. The church was a simple white building on the main street, and the minister, Reverend Hartley, was a jovial man with silver hair who asked only basic questions before conducting the ceremony. Tom had come along as witness, standing with his hat in his hands and beaming like a proud father. "Do you, Isaac Daniels, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Katherine Gallagher, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Katherine looked at Isaac's serious face, his creek-water eyes steady on hers. She thought about his kindness, his patience, the way he'd valued her skills instead of condemning her failures. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Isaac kissed her carefully, briefly, his lips warm against hers. It was Katherine's first kiss, and her heart hammered so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. When they broke apart, Isaac's eyes held a question, and Katherine smiled to let him know she was all right. They signed the marriage certificate, and just like that, Katherine Gallagher became Katherine Daniels. She was a married woman, a rancher's wife, bound to this man and this land in ways she was only beginning to understand. Isaac took her to the general store afterward, insisting she pick out some fabric for new dresses and anything else she might need. Katherine, uncomfortable with spending his money, chose modestly, but Isaac overruled her and added practical items like sturdy boots and work gloves and a broad-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. "You'll need these," he said firmly. "Ranch life is hard on clothes and harder on skin. No point in being miserable when you don't have to be." They had lunch at the town's small restaurant, where the proprietor, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Chen, made a fuss over them and insisted their meal was on the house as a wedding present. The food was delicious, far better than anything Katherine could have produced, and she said as much. "Mrs. Chen's the best cook in 3 counties, Isaac said. "Her husband runs the freight business. They came here from San Francisco back in the 70s. It must have taken courage, building a life in a new place, Katherine said, thinking of her own leap of faith. Same as you're doing now. Isaac's hand covered hers briefly on the table. Takes guts to leave everything you know behind. The ride back to the ranch felt different somehow, weighted with the knowledge that they were truly married now. Katherine found herself acutely aware of Isaac beside her, the solid warmth of him, the capable way his hands managed the reins. She wondered again about the marriage bed, about when he would come to her and what it would be like. The thought made her nervous and curious in equal measure. That night, after a simple supper that Mrs. Patterson had left prepared in the morning, Isaac walked Katherine to her bedroom door. "I meant what I said about taking time," he told her quietly. "We're married legal, but I don't expect anything from you until you're ready, until we both are." "That's very considerate," Katherine hesitated. "How will we know when we're ready?" Isaac's mouth quirked. "I suppose we'll figure that out as we go along. For now, let's just get to know each other, learn to be comfortable together." It was a relief and somehow also a disappointment. Katherine wasn't sure what she wanted, only that the uncertainty of it all made her feel off balance in a way that had nothing to do with the prairie horizon. The days settled into a rhythm. Katherine woke early and helped with morning chores, learning the routines of ranch life with determination. She couldn't cook, but she could haul water and feed animals and mend fences. When things broke, which they did with regularity, she fixed them. A gate latch that wouldn't close properly. A wagon wheel with a wobbly axle. The complicated mechanism in the kitchen pump that had been dripping for months. Isaac and Tom watched her work with growing respect. She would disappear into the workshop for hours, emerging with grease-stained hands and solutions to problems they'd lived with for so long they'd stopped noticing them. The ranch, already well-maintained, began to run even more smoothly. Mrs. Patterson came twice a week and took Katherine under her wing with maternal warmth, teaching her the basics of ranch cooking even though it was clear Katherine had little talent for it. The older woman seemed more amused than appalled by Katherine's culinary disasters. "Some women are born to the kitchen, some aren't," Mrs. Patterson said philosophically after Katherine's attempt at biscuits came out hard enough to use as building materials. "My sister can't boil water without burning it, but she's the best seamstress in 3 states. We all have our gifts." "I wish mine were more traditionally useful," Katherine admitted. "Useful is what's needed, not what's traditional." Mrs. Patterson patted her hand. "Isaac's lucky to have you, even if you can't cook." Katherine wasn't sure Isaac felt lucky exactly, but they were developing an easy companionship. They talked over meals, shared the work of the ranch, sat together on the porch in the evenings watching the spectacular sunsets. Isaac told her about his childhood in Missouri, the 4th son of a farmer with too many sons and too little land. Coming to Kansas had been his chance to build something of his own. "I spent 5 years working cattle drives before I had enough saved to buy this land," he said one evening. "Slept on the ground, ate dust, nearly got trampled more times than I can count, but I knew what I wanted. A place of my own, something permanent." "Do you ever regret it?" Katherine asked. "The isolation must be difficult sometimes." "Sometimes," Isaac admitted. "Winters can be long, but when spring comes and the grass greens up and the calves are born healthy, it's worth it. This is mine, Katherine. Ours now. We're building something that'll last." A month into their marriage, a traveling photographer passed through Linden and Isaac insisted they have a wedding portrait made. Katherine dressed in her best dress and stood beside her husband in the photographer's temporary studio, Isaac's hand resting gently on her shoulder. The photographer disappeared under his black cloth, and told them to hold still, and Katherine tried not to blink as the long exposure captured them forever, frozen in this moment of new beginning. It was around that time that Katherine began to notice how her body responded to Isaac's presence. The way her skin warmed when he helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong on her waist. The way her breath caught when she saw him stripped to the waist in the barn, muscles moving under sun-browned skin. The way her dreams had started to feature him in increasingly vivid ways that made her wake flushed and confused. She thought Isaac might be feeling something similar. She caught him watching her, sometimes with an intensity that made her pulse race. When they accidentally brushed against each other in the narrow spaces of the house, neither of them moved away as quickly as they once had. One evening in late August, a storm rolled across the prairie with dramatic fury, lightning splitting the sky and thunder shaking the house. Katherine stood at the window watching the spectacular display, fascinated by the raw power of it. Isaac came to stand beside her, so close she could feel the heat of him. "It's amazing," Katherine breathed. "I've never seen lightning like this." "Prairie storms are something else," Isaac agreed. His voice was rough. "Katherine, I need to ask you something." She turned to face him, heart pounding. "Yes, are you happy here, truly? I know this isn't the life you were raised for." "I'm happy," Katherine said honestly. "Happier than I expected to be. I like the work, I like the land, I like the way every day is different, and I like—" She hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. "I like you, Isaac, more than I expected to." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. "I like you too. More than is probably wise for a man who barely knows his own wife. We've been married 6 weeks. Feels longer. Feels like you've always been here." Isaac reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Katherine, I think I'm ready if you are." She knew what he meant, had been expecting and wanting and fearing this moment in equal measure. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "I've never been with a man before. I know, I'll be careful with you, we'll go slow." Isaac's hand cupped her face gently. "But only if you want this, I won't push." In answer, Katherine rose on her toes and kissed him, awkward and earnest and full of wanting. Isaac made a low sound in his throat and gathered her close, deepening the kiss until Katherine's knees went weak and her hands clutched at his shoulders for balance. They barely made it to his bedroom, stopping every few steps to kiss again, learning each other's mouths with increasing urgency. Isaac undressed her slowly despite the hunger she could feel vibrating through him, pausing to kiss newly revealed skin, murmuring words of praise that made her blush and burn. "You're beautiful," he said, and sounded like he meant it. "So damn beautiful." When they finally came together, it hurt less than Katherine had feared and felt more profound than she could have imagined. Isaac kept his promise, going slowly, watching her face, making sure she was with him every step. And when pleasure finally bloomed through her like lightning, Katherine cried out and clutched him close and understood with sudden clarity that this was what it meant to truly belong to someone. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Isaac's fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "More than all right." Katherine nestled closer to his warmth. "That was wonderful. It'll get better. Takes time to learn each other properly. I look forward to the education." Katherine felt brave enough to tease, and Isaac laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest where her head rested. "You're full of surprises, Katherine Daniels." "So are you, Isaac Daniels." They slept that night in his bed, now their bed, wrapped around each other while the storm raged outside and rain drummed on the roof. Katherine woke once in the darkness, momentarily disoriented, then felt Isaac's steady breathing beside her and smiled. This was her life now. This man, this place, this unexpected happiness. The next morning, Tom took one look at them over breakfast and grinned knowingly but said nothing, for which Katherine was grateful. She felt different, marked somehow by what had passed between them, and surely it showed on her face. Isaac kept finding excuses to touch her, his hand lingering on her back as he passed, his fingers brushing hers as they worked together. The weeks that followed were a golden time. The weather held fair and warm, perfect for the ranch work. Katherine's mechanical skills proved invaluable when the wagon's axle cracked, and she managed to brace and repair it well enough to get them through, until Isaac could order a replacement from town. When one of the horses went lame, Katherine studied the shoe and diagnosed the problem, a stone bruise that needed rest and time to heal. "How'd you know that?" Isaac asked, impressed. "Same principle as diagnosing any mechanical problem. Figure out what's causing pain or malfunction and address the root cause, not just the symptoms. You're applying machine logic to a horse. Why not? Bodies are just complicated machines when you think about it." Isaac laughed and pulled her close for a kiss. "You're not like any woman I've ever met." "Is that a good thing?" "It's a very good thing." Their physical relationship deepened and intensified. Isaac had been right that it got better with practice. Katherine discovered that her body was capable of pleasures she'd never imagined, and Isaac proved an attentive teacher, learning what made her gasp and sigh and finally shatter in his arms. They made love in their bed, against the kitchen table when they couldn't wait, once in the hayloft in the barn when the house felt too far away. In September, Katherine realized her monthly courses hadn't arrived. She waited another week to be sure, then told Isaac over breakfast, her heart in her throat. "You're certain?" His face was unreadable. "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. I'm never late, Isaac, and I've been feeling strange in the mornings, queasy." Isaac set down his coffee cup carefully. "How do you feel about it? I know we didn't exactly plan this." "I'm scared," Katherine admitted. "I don't know anything about being a mother, but I'm also happy. Aren't you?" "I'm terrified," Isaac said honestly. "But yes, I'm happy. More than happy." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "We're going to have a baby." Katherine buried her face in his shoulder, relief and joy and fear all tangling together. "What if I'm terrible at it?" "You won't be. You're not terrible at things that matter, Katherine. You just can't cook." Isaac pulled back enough to look at her face. "And our child will eat plenty well with Mrs. Patterson's help, so I'm not worried." Dr. Morrison in Linden confirmed the pregnancy and estimated the baby would arrive in late April or early May. He gave Katherine stern instructions about rest and nutrition and avoiding heavy lifting, which Katherine immediately ignored in favor of continuing her work around the ranch. Isaac worried, but Katherine felt strong and capable, and the work kept her from dwelling on her anxieties. As autumn progressed and the prairie grass turned gold, Katherine helped with the fall roundup, keeping the equipment running and repairing gear as needed. The cowhands who came to help with the big cattle drive to the railhead in Abilene were initially skeptical of a pregnant woman doing mechanical work, but they changed their tune quickly when she fixed a broken wagon tongue that would have delayed the whole operation by days. "Your wife's handy to have around," one of the hands told Isaac admiringly. "My woman can cook and sew pretty, but she can't fix nothing." "Katherine's one of a kind," Isaac agreed, watching his wife work with obvious pride. The cattle drive was successful, bringing in good money that would see them through the winter. Isaac used part of the profit to order a new gear for the windmill, proper replacement parts for the wagon, and a beautiful cradle made of carved oak that made Katherine's eyes sting with tears when he showed it to her. "For our son or daughter," he said softly. "Wanted them to have something nice." Winter came early that year, with snow falling in late November. Katherine had never experienced a prairie winter, and the isolation was profound. The ranch felt like an island in an endless white sea, with only occasional trips to town for supplies breaking the monotony. But Katherine found she didn't mind. The house was warm, Isaac was attentive and loving, and she spent the long dark evenings planning for the baby while Isaac carved little wooden animals by the fireplace. Mrs. Patterson taught Katherine basic sewing so she could make baby clothes, which Katherine managed with more success than cooking, though her stitches were serviceable rather than beautiful. Tom whittled rattles and toys. Isaac added a rocking chair to the bedroom, placing it near the window where Katherine could look out at the snow-covered prairie while she sewed. "I never thought I'd have this," Katherine said one evening, her hand resting on her swelling belly. "A home, a husband who cares for me, a child coming. It feels like a dream." Isaac set aside his carving and came to kneel beside her chair. "It's real. You're real, this is real. And I love you, Katherine. I should have said it before now, but I do. I love you." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow, warming her from the inside out. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it scares me sometimes." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, his hand joining hers on her belly where their child grew. "Nothing to be scared of, we're in this together." Christmas was quiet but joyful, just the three of them, Isaac, Katherine, and Tom, who'd become like family. They exchanged simple gifts. Katherine had repaired Isaac's father's old pocket watch, which he'd thought was beyond fixing. Isaac gave Katherine a set of precision tools he'd ordered from back east, knowing how much she'd appreciate quality equipment. Tom presented them with a beautiful hand-carved wooden box for storing baby things. "You've made this old cowhen very happy," Tom told them over Mrs. Patterson's excellent Christmas dinner. "It's good to see this ranch have a family again." As winter deepened, Katherine's pregnancy became more obvious. By February, she was large enough that some tasks became difficult, though she still insisted on doing light work around the ranch. Isaac fussed over her constantly, which Katherine found alternately endearing and annoying. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested when he tried to prevent her from climbing a ladder to fix a loose shingle. "You're carrying my child. I'm allowed to worry." "Worry quietly then and let me work." Isaac sighed but knew better than to argue when Katherine got that stubborn set to her jaw. Instead, he hovered nearby, ready to catch her if she fell, which she never did. In March, the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared. Katherine felt increasingly uncomfortable, her body stretched and strange, but the baby moved vigorously, which Dr. Morrison said was a good sign. They'd arranged for Mrs. Patterson to come stay at the ranch when Katherine's time approached, since the older woman had experience with birthing, having helped deliver half the babies in the county. The baby came early, 3 weeks before expected, on a warm April evening. Katherine's water broke while she was in the workshop fixing a harness buckle, and the first contraction hit her so hard she gasped and clutched the workbench. "Isaac," she called, trying to keep the panic from her voice. He came running from the barn, took one look at her face and swung into action. Tom was dispatched to fetch Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Morrison. Isaac helped Katherine to the bedroom, his own face pale with fear. "It's going to be all right," he kept saying, more to himself than to her. "You're going to be fine." "I know," Katherine said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The contractions were already close together, the pain building to levels she hadn't anticipated. "Isaac, I'm scared. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He held her hand, letting her squeeze until his bones creaked, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement as the hours crawled past. Mrs. Patterson arrived and took charge with brisk efficiency, sending Isaac out of the room despite his protests. "This is women's work. You'll just be in the way." But Katherine wouldn't let him go. "I want him here," she gasped between contractions. "He stays." Mrs. Patterson looked ready to argue, then nodded. "All right then. But you do what I say, Mr. Daniels, and don't you dare faint on me." The labor was long and brutal. Katherine had faced many difficulties in her life, but nothing prepared her for the sheer physical ordeal of bringing a child into the world. She screamed and cursed and wept, and through it all, Isaac held her hand and told her she was strong and brave and that he loved her. Dr. Morrison arrived just as the sun was setting, examined Katherine, and pronounced that everything was progressing normally if slowly. "First babies take their time," he said calmly. "She's doing fine." Finally, as full darkness fell and the stars came out over the prairie, Katherine gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slide free in a rush of relief so profound she sobbed. A moment later, an angry wail filled the room, and Mrs. Patterson laughed in triumph. "You have a son," she announced, holding up a red-faced, squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." Isaac's face was wet with tears as Mrs. Patterson placed the baby in Katherine's arms. He was perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the color of his father's creek water gaze. Katherine touched his tiny fingers with wonder, overwhelmed by the fierce love that surged through her. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama." "He's beautiful," Isaac said hoarsely. "You're both beautiful. Katherine, you were so brave." "I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was dying." "But you didn't. You did it." Isaac kissed her forehead, then carefully touched the baby's cheek with one rough finger. "Our son." They named him James, after Katherine's father, hoping the boy would inherit his grandfather's best qualities without the worst. James Daniels proved to be a healthy baby with strong lungs and an appetite that kept Katherine exhausted for weeks. She'd worried she would be a terrible mother, but instinct and fierce protectiveness carried her through the early days. Isaac was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with James when he fussed at night. Tom carved toys and sang old cowboy songs in a surprisingly pleasant voice. Mrs. Patterson brought food and advice and stayed for a week to help Katherine recover from the birth. "You did well, child," the older woman said before she left. "Being a mother doesn't come naturally to everyone, but you've got the most important part down. You love him fiercely." "I do," Katherine agreed, looking at James sleeping in his beautiful carved cradle. "I never knew I could love someone this much." Spring turned to summer, and life on the ranch adapted to include a baby. Katherine learned to work one-handed, James often strapped to her chest in a sling while she did repairs and maintenance. He seemed content to be near her, watching with serious eyes as she worked. "He's going to be a thinker like his mama," Isaac observed one day, watching James study a gear mechanism with unusual focus for a 3-month-old. "Or maybe he'll be a rancher like his father," Katherine said. "Maybe he'll be both. No reason he can't be." By the time James was 6 months old, Katherine had slipped back fully into the rhythm of ranch life. She was a better mother than she'd feared, and James was thriving. The ranch continued to prosper, partly due to Katherine's ability to keep everything running smoothly. Word had spread in the county about the woman who could fix anything mechanical, and neighboring ranchers began stopping by asking for help with various problems. Katherine enjoyed the work and the extra income it brought in. She fixed threshing machines and windmills and wagons, diagnosing problems with the same focused intensity she'd applied to her father's printing presses. Isaac was proud of her growing reputation, though he drew the line at her taking on jobs that required traveling far from home. "People can bring their broken equipment here if they want you to fix it," he said firmly. "I'm not having you gone for days while I worry." "You're sweet when you're being overprotective," Katherine teased, but she didn't argue. She had everything she needed right here. 2 years after James's birth, Katherine realized she was pregnant again. This time, she was less frightened, having survived it once already. Isaac was delighted, and James, now a toddling 2-year-old with his father's hair and his mother's sharp eyes, seemed to sense something was changing, though he was too young to understand what. "Baby," Katherine told him, letting him pat her growing belly. "You're going to have a baby brother or sister." James looked skeptical but interested, his little hand gentle on her stomach. The second baby, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, arrived in January during a snowstorm that trapped them at the ranch for 3 days. Katherine's labor was shorter this time, though no less intense, and when Mrs. Patterson placed the tiny red-haired girl in her arms, Katherine felt her heart expand impossibly further. "A daughter," Isaac said wonderingly, his finger swallowed by Margaret's tiny grip. "She's going to be trouble, I can tell already." "She's going to be smart and strong," Katherine corrected. "Just you wait." James was both fascinated and slightly jealous of his new sister, requiring patience and attention to adjust to sharing his parents. But he proved to be a gentle big brother, bringing his sister toys and singing to her in his piping toddler voice. The years flowed past with the steady rhythm of ranch life. There were hard times: a drought one summer that tested everyone's endurance, a winter so brutal they lost several head of cattle, a fever that swept through the county and terrified Katherine until her children recovered. But there were more good times than bad. Birthdays and Christmases and ordinary days that glowed with simple happiness. Katherine's reputation as a mechanic grew. She was eventually hired by the railroad to consult on a tricky problem with their new water tower pump, a job that paid enough to let them buy an adjoining section of land and expand the ranch. Isaac was impressed by her expertise and never anything but supportive, bragging to anyone who would listen about his wife's abilities. "Most men would be embarrassed to have a wife who works like I do," Katherine said once. "Most men are fools," Isaac replied. "Why would I be embarrassed about being married to someone extraordinary?" James grew tall and thoughtful, showing aptitude for both ranching and mechanics. Margaret was fierce and funny, with her mother's sharp mind and her father's steady temperament. In 1891, when James was 8 and Margaret was 6, Katherine gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Henry, much to everyone's surprise. 4 children, Katherine said, exhausted but laughing as she looked at her sons. "We're going to need a bigger house." "We'll build one," Isaac promised, and they did, adding rooms and a proper workshop for Katherine's increasingly sophisticated equipment. Tom stayed with them until he was too old to work, at which point he moved into the main house and became a beloved grandfather figure to the children. He died peacefully in his sleep at 78, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he'd helped build. Katherine wept at his funeral, remembering the kind man who'd welcomed her without judgment on her first day as a mail-order bride who couldn't cook. Mrs. Patterson continued to come weekly even as she aged, teaching Katherine's daughter the cooking skills that Katherine herself had never mastered. Margaret proved more talented in the kitchen than her mother, though she also inherited Katherine's mechanical aptitude and could often be found helping with repairs. "She's the best of both of us," Isaac said proudly, watching Margaret fix a broken clock while bread rose on the kitchen counter. As the children grew and the new century approached, Katherine sometimes reflected on the long, strange journey that had brought her to Kansas. She'd left Philadelphia terrified and desperate, lying about her abilities to secure a future. She'd found instead a man who valued her for who she actually was, who saw worth in skills the world often dismissed as unfeminine. The ranch prospered and expanded. They added modern conveniences. As they became available, a new windmill pump, better fencing, eventually even one of the new gasoline-powered tractors that Katherine maintained with fascinated attention. Isaac often joked that Katherine loved that tractor more than she loved him, to which she would reply that the tractor was less argumentative. In 1899, as the century drew to a close, Isaac and Katherine celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. The children had planned a surprise party, inviting neighbors and friends to the ranch for a celebration. Katherine was touched by the outpouring of affection from the community they'd built a life in. "You've done well here," Reverend Hartley, now elderly but still preaching, told them. "Built something lasting." "We got lucky," Katherine said. "Luck had nothing to do with it. You two put in the work, made a partnership that could weather anything." The Reverend smiled. "I remember the day I married you. Young Isaac was so nervous I thought he might bolt, and you looked half terrified yourself. But I could see you were both honest, decent people. That matters more than anything else in a marriage." That night, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Katherine and Isaac sat on their porch watching the stars wheel overhead, just as they had countless times before. 16 years, Isaac mused. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Do you ever regret it? Sending for a mail-order bride who lied to you, Katherine. You've asked me some variation of that question probably 100 times over the years, and my answer is always the same. Isaac took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers as naturally as breathing. "Not for 1 second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and the children and this life we built together. Even though I still can't cook worth a damn," Isaac laughed, the sound warm in the darkness. "Especially because of that. You know what I realized early on? I didn't need a wife who could make fancy meals. I needed a partner who could stand beside me and help build something real. Someone smart and strong and capable of fixing what was broken, including me. You weren't broken. I was lonely. Didn't even realize how lonely until you showed up with your toolbox and your honesty and your complete inability to bake bread." Isaac pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. "You fixed that, Katherine. You fixed the empty places in my life and filled them with love and laughter and purpose." Katherine leaned into his warmth, her heart full. "I love you, Isaac Daniels. I love you too, Katherine Daniels. My wife who can't cook but can fix anything, and who turned out to be worth more than I ever dared hope for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the prairie night stretch endlessly around them. In the house behind them, their children slept safely. In the barn, the animals rested. The windmill Katherine had fixed all those years ago still turned smoothly, pumping life, giving water. Everything she'd built here, everything she'd become, had grown from that first terrifying leap of faith when she'd stepped off the train in Linden with a carpet bag and a toolbox and a heart full of desperate hope. She'd been looking for survival and found instead a life richer than anything she'd imagined. She'd been afraid she wasn't enough and discovered she was exactly what was needed. The mechanical skills that had seemed useless in Philadelphia had proved invaluable on a Kansas ranch. The honesty that had terrified her on that first day had become the foundation of a marriage built on trust and respect and genuine partnership. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked softly. "How strange life is. How the things we think are our biggest flaws sometimes turn out to be our greatest strengths. Your inability to cook was never a flaw. It was just a fact, like having green eyes or being tall. What mattered was everything else you brought with you." The intelligence, the work ethic, the courage to keep trying even when things were hard. Isaac kissed her temple. "You're remarkable, Katherine. Never doubt that." The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. James eventually took over much of the ranch management, proving himself a capable cattleman with his father's steady nature and his mother's problem-solving abilities. Margaret married a teacher from Linden, a gentle man who supported her unusual interests and didn't mind that his wife could repair a steam engine as easily as sew a dress. The twins grew into strong young men who worked the ranch alongside their father and older brother. Katherine's hair silvered early, streaks of white appearing in the auburn by her 40th birthday. Isaac's hair went gray too, and his face gained lines from years of sun and wind, but to Katherine, he only grew more handsome with age. They'd weathered so much together, from harsh weather to personal loss to the everyday struggles of raising a family. Each challenge had somehow bound them closer rather than driving them apart. In 1905, Isaac bought Katherine a set of professional-grade machinist tools from a catalog, the finest available. Katherine cried when she opened the crate, overwhelmed by the thought he'd put into the gift. "You deserve the best tools for the work you do," Isaac said simply. "You've kept this ranch running for over 20 years, Katherine. Least I can do is make sure you have proper equipment." With those tools, Katherine was able to take on even more sophisticated repair work. She fixed steam tractors and threshing machines, and even helped design improvements to irrigation systems for several area farms. Her expertise became well known throughout the county and beyond, though she always insisted on keeping her work close to home so she could still be available for her family. As the children grew and eventually started families of their own, the ranch house filled with grandchildren. Katherine discovered that being a grandmother was somehow even more delightful than being a mother, perhaps because she could enjoy the children without bearing the full weight of responsibility for them. She taught her grandchildren to use tools, to think through problems logically, to value their own unique abilities, whatever those might be. Grandma Kate fixed everything, her oldest granddaughter would later write in a school essay. Clocks and pumps and wagons and hearts. She showed me that being a woman doesn't mean you have to do things the way everyone expects. You can make your own path. Isaac remained her rock through all of it, her partner in the truest sense. They made decisions together, worked side by side, raised their family with united purpose. They still made love, though less frequently as their bodies aged, finding comfort and pleasure in each other's touch even as passion mellowed into something deeper and more enduring. One evening in 1908, as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with their children and grandchildren gathered around them, Katherine looked at the faces she loved and felt such profound gratitude it threatened to overwhelm her. Her children were healthy and happy, building good lives. Her husband still looked at her with love and appreciation after a quarter century. The ranch was thriving. She had work that satisfied her and a community that valued her contributions. "Speech, Mama," Margaret called, and the others took up the call. Katherine stood, suddenly self-conscious with all eyes on her. "I'm not much for speeches," she began, "but I want to say something about your father. When I came here 25 years ago, I was running from poverty and desperation. I lied on my mail-order bride application about being able to cook, which Isaac discovered pretty quickly." She paused as laughter rippled through the room. "I was terrified he'd send me back east, but instead he looked at what I could do rather than what I couldn't. He valued my abilities, even though they weren't traditional ones for a woman. That was the first of many gifts he gave me." Isaac's ears were red, but he was smiling at her with such warmth that Catherine's voice caught. He gave me a home when I had none. He gave me partnership when I expected to be simply a housekeeper with a ring. He gave me love I didn't know existed, and children I never dared hope for, and a life so full and rich that sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe it's real. Katherine looked directly at Isaac. You told me once, very early on, that my skills were worth more than cooking. You've spent 25 years proving that you meant it. Thank you for seeing me, Isaac, for valuing me, for building this beautiful life with me. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when she finished. Isaac stood and pulled her into a long embrace while their family applauded. When he finally released her enough to speak, his voice was rough with emotion. Katherine Daniels, you are the best decision I ever made. Here's to the next 25 years. They didn't get quite 25 more years, though they came close. Isaac died in his sleep in 1931 at the age of 72, with Katherine beside him in the bed they'd shared for nearly half a century. His heart simply stopped, the doctor said, worn out after a long life of hard work and deep love. Katherine was 70 herself by then, still sharp-minded though her hands had stiffened with arthritis that made fine mechanical work difficult. She mourned Isaac with the depth of grief that comes from losing half of yourself, the person who'd been woven into every aspect of your life. The ranch felt empty without him, too quiet, though it was still filled with family. James wanted her to come live with him, but Katherine refused. This is my home, she said firmly. Your father and I built this together. I'm not leaving it. She lived another 8 years in the house. Isaac had expanded for their growing family, tending a garden and doing light work around the property. Her children and grandchildren visited often, and she was never truly alone. But she missed Isaac with an ache that never fully faded, missed his steady presence and his dry humor, and the way he'd looked at her like she hung the moon even when she was covered in grease from fixing some piece of equipment. Katherine died in 1939, in her sleep, just like Isaac. She was 78 years old. They buried her beside him on the hill overlooking the ranch, under a shared headstone that read simply, Isaac and Katherine Daniels, partners in life, love, and labor. Their children found, when they cleaned out the house, a wooden box tucked away in Katherine's closet. Inside were treasures from a life well lived. The wedding photograph from 1883, both of them so young and uncertain. A pressed flower from their first spring together. The gear Katherine had fixed from the windmill on her second day at the ranch, which Isaac had saved. Letters they'd written to each other during the few times they'd been separated. A small journal Katherine had kept, with observations about ranch life and mechanical problems solved, and, scattered throughout, simple declarations of love for the man she'd married. On the last page of the journal, in Katherine's increasingly shaky handwriting, was a final entry dated just a week before her death. I came to Kansas as a desperate woman with nothing but a toolbox and lies about being able to cook. I found a man who looked past what I couldn't do to see what I could. Isaac gave me a life I never dreamed possible. He valued me not despite my unconventional skills, but because of them. He showed me that worth isn't measured by how well you fit society's expectations, but by the love you give, and the work you do, and the life you build. I've had 56 years on this ranch, 48 of them with Isaac by my side and 8 without. Every single one was worth living. If I could go back and do it all again, I wouldn't change a thing. Well, maybe I'd try harder to learn to cook, but probably not. Isaac always said my mechanical skills were worth more than any pie I could have baked, and he spent our whole marriage proving he meant it. What more could anyone ask for than to be valued exactly as they are? I was the luckiest woman alive. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, modernizing with the times but keeping its essential character. The original house was eventually turned into a museum celebrating early Kansas ranch life, with special exhibits about Katherine's remarkable mechanical abilities, and the unusual marriage between a cowboy who needed a partner and a mail-order bride who couldn't cook, but could fix anything. Visitors to the museum can still see some of Katherine's tools, lovingly preserved, and read excerpts from her journal. The windmill she fixed on her second day in Kansas still stands, restored and functional, a testament to skills that were ahead of their time. And on the hill overlooking the ranch, the shared headstone serves as a reminder that the best love stories aren't always the conventional ones. Sometimes the most lasting partnerships are built not on meeting expectations, but on valuing what makes someone unique. Isaac Daniels saw worth where others might have seen failure, and Katherine Gallagher had the courage to be herself, even when it meant admitting her shortcomings. Together, they built something that lasted long beyond their own lives, a legacy of love and mutual respect and the simple truth that fixing what's broken, whether it's machinery or loneliness, has worth that can't be measured. The story of the mail-order bride who couldn't cook, but could fix anything, and the cowboy who said that was worth more, became a family legend passed down through the generations. It was a reminder that true value lies not in conforming to what's expected, but in bringing your whole, authentic self to life's challenges. Katherine and Isaac's great-great-grandchildren still lived in Kansas, still told the story of their unusual ancestors, still kept some of Katherine's tools on display in their homes as cherished heirlooms. And every once in a while, when something broke down on the ranch that had been in the family for over 150 years, someone would say with a smile, "We need someone with Katherine's touch," because her legacy wasn't just in the machinery she'd fixed or the ranch she'd helped build. It was in the lesson she'd taught simply by living her life with authenticity and courage. That worth comes in many forms, and the rarest treasure is finding someone who recognizes and values your particular gifts, whatever they may be. That was the true ending of Katherine and Isaac's story, not in their deaths, but in the ripples they'd left behind, in children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward their values. In the idea that a marriage could be a true partnership between equals with different strengths. In the knowledge that love means seeing someone clearly, flaws and gifts together, and choosing them anyway. Choosing them not despite who they are, but because of it. On warm summer evenings, when the wind blew across the Kansas prairie just right, you could almost imagine Katherine and Isaac were still there on the porch of that old ranch house, sitting side by side watching the sunset paint the endless sky in colors that took your breath away. Still partners. Still in love. Still proving, after all those years, that sometimes the most important thing isn't what you can cook, but what you can build together when someone believes in you enough to let you try.